In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
That's what we were told. Most Americans never believed Lee Oswald was the lone gunman, for excellent reasons. In fact, there were at least 6 shooters who fired from 8 to 10 shots or more who are identified here. We have, finally, the solution to the greatest murder mystery in history, laid out for the world to see, proof after proof after proof. Photos were faked, the body was changed, x-rays were altered, the home movies were fixed. 15 experts contribute to a 529-page book with 1,037 photos and diagrams in black and white and color.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you'd like JFK, who, how, and why, and would like to support the new JFK show, then go to patriotradiobooks.com. That's patriotradiobooks.com.
Okay, it's been a little while. This is going to be the new JFK show number 168. Larry Rivera is taking care of business in Puerto Rico, and as you can imagine, things are very rough out there. Tonight we have our man, Jim Fetzer, and also we have Ralph Cinque, 2 doctors and very capable men. So let's go ahead and get rolling on the first JFK show in quite a while. It's been a month now.
Well, thank you, Gary, and I'm very glad Ralph is here with us. We have the breaking story of more than 2,800 files supposed to be released hours after Trump announced that some documents would be withheld for 6 months. So I like this. Spies can black out portions. They've only had over 50 years to do this now. Of course, this is a consequence of the JFK Records Act, which was passed by Congress in the wake of the resurgence of interest generated by Oliver Stone's film JFK. There was a 25-year time limit on the release of all the documents, which was set in 1992, which is why 2017 turns out to be in play. When the Warren Commission sealed all of its documents, it was for 75 years, evidently on the ground that the average lifespan of an American is 75 years, so that no one who was alive at the time would be alive when the documents were released to point out the gross discrepancies between what we were told by the government and what the documents themselves reveal. Here, the idea that he's holding back, something like 300 files, if you scan down to the second paragraph, the bottom paragraph, I have no choice, Trump said in a memo citing potentially irreversible harm to national security. If we allow all the records out now, more than 50 years after the assassination, there's still potential irreversible harm to national security when, and Ralph, I'm sure you'll agree, if the official narrative were true of a lone disgruntled gunman firing 3 lucky shots and killing the president and wounding the governor were true, there's no national security aspect to this at all.
Well, so, obviously, this is just a window dressing to just hide the fact that there's just things that they don't want to release because they are implicating of wrongdoing on their part and the whole corruption that was involved in framing Oswald. But I knew before they even started that, if there was anything glaringly, probative, that they were going to, by one means or another, with or without permission, they were going to get rid of it.
Right.
What I was hoping for, and what I've already found to some extent, which I'm going to share today with the viewers, is that there would be subtle things that were read over, but it just went over the radar as being really suggestive of anything inappropriate in the way of conduct at the time. And I have already found a couple, and I've only flipped through the first, few dozen of the entries. There's thousands, so I'm sure that there's a lot more. So I do think there's going to be fruit to be harvested from this document release, only because the people who were guarding it just aren't privy enough to realize.
Right. I have a half a dozen or more nuggets that I'll offer as illustrations, but
Good.
this is to acknowledge that we have not been able to pour through this vast treasure trove as yet, and therefore these are only examples of what's showing up, with more to come. Now, here's what many think the documents are going to look like. On the right, you see a vast redaction. You know, in fact, there's some jokes where what you get is nothing but black like that. It appears we're actually better off than that, glad to say. Here is actually from a Russian state television. They interviewed me and Paul Craig Roberts just a few days ago about the release of the documents, which I was very pleased to have the opportunity, because Russia needs to understand that once you appreciate that the autopsy x-rays were altered to conceal a blowout to the back of the head, that another brain was substituted for that of JFK, that the Zapruder film was massively revised, that neither the KGB nor pro or anti-Castro Cubans nor the mafia could have done any of those things, although the KGB no doubt has the ability to edit films and revise them even extensively. It could not have obtained a copy of the Zapruder, that the mafia could not possibly have extended its reach into the Bethesda Naval Hospital to alter x-rays under control of medical officers of the U.S. Navy and agents of the Secret Service. That pro or anti-Castro Cubans could not have substituted someone else's brain for that of JFK. So when we unravel the cover, it narrows to a very special class about which we will consider the players further. They did talk about the backyard photographs during this interview. I've asked Judith to translate it from Russian if she's able. But of course, as you well know, Ralph, there were 4 of these backyard photographs. They all had Lee's face in exactly the same configuration, which, given they were taken at different times in different poses, is a photographic impossibility. We have Jim Mars and I published an article about Framing the Patsy, the case of Lee Harvey Oswald, where we observe that he has a block chin. That's not Lee's chin. There's an insert line between the chin and the lower lip, that the fingertips of the right hand are cut off. He's holding the Mannlicher Carcana, which he's alleged to have shot JFK, wearing a revolver belt with a revolver with which he's alleged to have shot Officer J.D. Tippit, and holding 2 communist newspapers, a worker and a militant, which is rather a neat combination, right, of motive and means. And we know since he was in the book depository building, he had the opportunity, according to the official account. But as Jack White observed, you can use those newspapers whose dimensions are known as an internal yardstick to measure the height. And it turns out, using the newspapers, the person posing is only 5'6", or more likely that when they fabricated the photograph, they put the newspapers in a little too large. In fact, Jim Mars and I were able to identify, and Larry Rivera has now confirmed, who stood in for Lee Oswald, and it turned out to be Roscoe White, who has the same body build. Larry even found a photograph of Roscoe standing in the same pose, and he superimposed it. It's a perfect match. It's got the block chin.
Absolutely riveting. I've seen it.
He's got the block chin, and not only, as Jim noticed, the stand-in has this funny bump on his right wrist, near the wrist, and Roscoe White has that same funny bump. So,
yeah, right. It's a bump in the bone there.
Have you seen that, Gary? Have you seen what, Larry?
I have. It's just amazing how we use technology to confirm what we already know.
That's right. That's right.
What I think is interesting is this, Jim, that, you have, the A and the B up here, but, there's a C that wasn't discovered until years later, and it wasn't really officially, part of the case, but there is the C, and the C is actually photographically far better than either one of these two. It's actually a very, very much better, clearer, sharper photo.
Well, and of course, there's a D as well.
Is there?
Ralph, yeah, there are 4 photographs altogether.
Yeah. But here's the thing I wonder about is this. When you think about the fact that these were taken on the same day, within a few minutes, within a few seconds of each other, same lighting conditions, same camera, same everything, why would C be so much better? I mean, what I'm thinking, and I apply this to many of the images in the assassination, is I think that they deliberately degrade images. They've degraded films, and they've degraded images just so that we can't see too much, and that it keeps it vague and keeps it hazy. And
Ralph, I think that's a very perceptive observation. I would be willing to bet you're exactly right. And perhaps
one more example before we move on is that, you know, when you watch the Dave Wigman film, it's extremely blurry. It's crappy, if you want to know the truth. But there's a few still frames from it that are often shown in which they look much sharper than the film does when we watch the film. And obviously, you can't make a good frame from something that was crap to begin with. So what it tells me is that somewhere there exists a good version of the Wigman film. And remember, the guy was an NBC cameraman. Obviously, they were going to give him the best equipment, the best training, the best everything. And the idea that he couldn't make something better than what he got is ridiculous. But anyway, the fact that they have still frames that are much clearer tells me that they do have a film that, or at least they did have a film that did show things much better than what we see today. And I know the reason why they couldn't show it clearly, because if you saw the start of that film clearly, it's the first couple seconds where you see Oswald standing in the doorway as Wigman is making the turn from Euston to Elm. And if it wasn't blurred up, there'd be no doubt that you're looking at Oswald. They just had to screw with it. They had to mess it up.
Yeah, we deal with that today. Blurry pictures are a part of the false flags that we get every single day. We hardly ever get any clear images.
Those are excellent comments. Here is part of, they interviewed me for 30 minutes, but as these things go, when the BBC came to interview me for their first Conspiracy Files program on 9/11, they interviewed me for 8 minutes and they used for 8 hours, and they used 7.5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, here they interviewed me for 30 minutes and used me for about 30 seconds.
Oh.
But nevertheless, you know, I was very glad to make contact and to be, you know, taken with an appropriate degree of seriousness by Russian state television.
And this is not RT, right? This is a channel out of Russia.
This is Russian state television.
Russian state television.
Yeah, this is not RT.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the big deal.
Okay.
And I want to get a translation from Judith if she's able to do it, because, you know, of course it's in Russian, and mine is, let us say, a bit Russian. Now here's WikiLeaks offering a $100,000 reward for the redacted parts of the files that have been held back for security reasons. See, now Julian Assange, Ralph, this guy is so smart and he's doing so much good. It just dumbfounds me when anyone questions his integrity or his motives. I think the guy ranks right up there at the top of the Parthenon of truth tellers and, you know, whistleblowers par excellence.
He is one of the most heroic people in the world, as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely. And
I won't be surprised if this offer brings about some revelations.
But
so here they're clarifying the numbers.
The whole idea that they redacted parts of it is totally against the spirit of what it was supposed to be. The idea is, okay, you wait the 75 years, now you can see it. But what they're really saying is that, well, there's some things you can never see, you know.
Right. Because it would blow the whole story out of the water.
Yeah, so, I bet the Bush name comes up quite often.
Now, here's from the Telegraph in the UK, Trump's latest clash with spy agencies, but they do something very, very interesting here because they talk about the conspiracy theories and they trivialize.
Yes, absolutely they do.
Yeah, none of these is a serious conspiracy theory. Take the driver, William Greer. I know people who believe that to this day.
Yeah.
But if Greer, who was to JFK's left front, had actually shot JFK, his brains would have been blown out to the right rear. when they were blown out to the left. So it's simple ballistics disproves that theory. The grassy knoll, now they're saying there could have been one other shooter, you see. They never talk about the potential for being multiple assassins at multiple locations. Just to trivialize friendly fire, we know this is a ridiculous theory.
Yes.
Who was a Secret Service agent who actually hit Jack in the back of the head, which, by the way, would have blown out his face. I mean, you know, Jackie, in her testimony to the Warren Commission, reported how from the front he looked just fine, but that she had a terrible time holding his skull and brains together at the back of his head. Well, if this friendly fire theory were true, he would not have looked just fine. His face would have been blown off. The Vatican.
These alternate stories are introduced just to create noise, to create distraction, you know, to just make everything seem like it's a jumble. And it could have been.
Well, Ralph, it's more than that. It's deflationary about conspiracy theories. It's suggesting this is as serious as they get. You see, by only posing these alternatives, it's as though no one has ever thought this through more deeply than these super.
Everyone's a crackpot who
right.
goes down the road.
There is another one that I've come across, and I'm amazed that it goes on, but that JFK was not killed at all that day, and there was a dummy in the limousine. And you'd be surprised how many hardcore researchers believe that it was all a false flag, fake story.
Gary, you want to hear a topper? Jackie shot JFK.
Yeah, I mean, that one too.
That's another one.
This is just ludicrous.
I
she
know.
held him in her arms all the way to Parkland, telling him she loved him. She climbed out the back on the trunk to get a big chunk of his skull and brains. After they pried his moribund body out of her arms, she composed herself and came into trauma room 1. Turned to the anesthesiologist, Pepper Jenkins, extended her hand and asked, "Will this help?"
Oh,
the most poignant moment in the history of the assassination. I mean, she knew a lot about literature, art, music, theater. She knew nothing about brain surgery, ballistics, wounds. You know, that was just beyond her ken. This wasn't something that could be put back together. Then we get, you know, frankly, I've never seen any role for the Vatican. After all, Jack was a Catholic, the first Catholic president. So this theory would have it that the Vatican would want to assassinate the first Catholic president of the United States.
I have to admit, I've never heard that one either. I've heard the rest of them, plus plenty more, but never that one.
Well, the mob, see, the real assassin was Johnny Rossielli, but, you know, as I've already explained, the mob could not have extended its reach into Bethesda Naval Hospital to alter x-rays under control of medical officers of the U.S. Navy Secret Service agents. It couldn't have substituted someone else's brain. It could not have got a hold of the Zapruder film. I mean, this is just, you know, loopy. But of course, it's saying with the CIA, and we could argue that one of the shooters, at least, Frank Sturgis, had ties to both the mob and to the CIA as a soldier of fortune. Then, of course, the magic bullet. I mean,
now, hold on, Jim. Are you telling me that they couldn't have pulled all this off from an Italian restaurant?
David, of course, demonstrated the magic bullet theory isn't even anatomically possible by taking a patient with similar chest and neck dimensions and creating a CAT scan and then plotting the official trajectory because cervical vertebrae intervene, which, as you well know, Ralph, is why when they do these reconstructions, they do a simulation of JFK that's missing a crucial anatomical feature. They don't have a backbone, which is stunning and ironic because the reason Jack was killed was precisely because he did have backbone.
Well, indeed.
Now here, if you get serious about it, you draw a distinction between the sponsors, the individuals and groups who wanted to take him out, principally to replace his policies with those of Lyndon Johnson, except for the anti-Castro Cubans who simply wanted revenge. He was threatening to destroy the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He directed that its covert ops be supervised by the Joint Chiefs. They weren't happy about that. They had other grudges with Jack. He hadn't invaded Cuba, contrary to their unanimous recommendation. He'd signed an above-ground test ban treaty with the Soviet Union against their unanimous opposition. Now he was going to pull our forces out of Vietnam, where they believed a stand had to be taken against the expansion of international godless communism. The anti-Castro Cubans believed he betrayed them at the Bay of Pigs, which was false, but the CIA allowed them to continue to believe it, lest they turn their anger and hostility on the agency itself. The mafia was upset because Bobby was cracking down on organized crime with more indictments and convictions than ever before in history. The Eastern establishment surrounded the Fed. Of course, Jack had directed the Department of the Treasury to print United States notes, which didn't require paying interest. He thought it was absurd for the American government to be paying interest to a consortium of private banks to print
that just printed the money to
right.
lend.
This is the Fed, which has been a monster problem for the United States. It's been a monster problem for
nuts to let somebody else print money and you pay them interest.
No.
Isn't that absurd? Isn't that absurd, Ralph?
Well, you know what goes on to this day, though.
It does. It does. It does.
Hold on. There's credible people like G. Edward Griffin and James Corbett who flat out believes it is a myth that JFK was working against the Fed. And we need to have a show about that really soon.
Ralph, this is really peculiar, but Corbett's looking at Executive Order 11110, and that is not the directive that created the United States notes. But I held one of these in my hand, and it had a red embossed in.
They immediately tried to round up and remove from circulation all those U.S. notes. Some of them remained in private hands, but mostly they were extracted from the money supply, so that when people brought them to the bank, say to make a deposit or something, the banks were instructed to put them aside and they would be replaced with Fed notes.
Right.
So no, this was a major issue. And
well, the point Gary's making is that someone as sophisticated as James Corbett
and G. Edward Griffin as well.
And G. Edward Griffin were both agreeing that Jack hadn't done what he manifestly had done, because they didn't separate the issuance of United States notes, about which you can even read in Wikipedia, from the Executive Order 11110, which wasn't related thereto. So while some people have mistakenly connected them, they're separate issues. That Corbett and Griffith were unable to separate the two was rather dumbfounding to me when Gary and I began doing a show that's only half recorded.
They also go so far as to say
there's a photo. There's a photo somewhere of JFK actually holding one of these notes.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they're going so far as to say that JFK was actually helping and giving more power to the Federal Reserve as opposed to taking it away. So I really want to do a show on that. That's a very important show.
I would certainly take issue with it. Put it that way.
Okay.
And of course, the Texas oilmen were upset because he was going to cut the oil depletion allowance, an enormous write-off they got on the ground, that because oil was a finite resource, they were putting themselves out of business by pumping it out of the ground. And a very significant development with Israel, where David Ben-Gurion, its first prime minister and one of the founders of the state of Israel, wanted to develop nuclear weapons, which JFK opposed. So, the Israelis were very upset. And, of course, Jack required
that Ben-Gurion actually resigned over it.
Yeah, he appears to have resigned in disgust after, as I understand it, directing the Mossad to participate or aid or support the assassination of JFK.
Let me ask you something about that. What specific role do you think the Mossad played in the assassination? What did they do to bring it to?
I think it was much more, Lyndon Johnson's op. He even sent his chief administrative aide, Cliff Carter, down to Dallas to make sure all the arrangements were in place for the assassination. The mechanics and shooter supervisors, I've identified 6 on the basis of my research, but the coordinators included George Herbert Walker Bush and Edward Lansdale, who we believe actually positioned the shooters and determined the sequence of shots. Where George H.W. Bush was actually arrested coming out of the Dow Tex, identified himself as an independent Houston oilman, was taken downtown, returned later. A deputy sheriff kept a record of it, Ralph. So we know that, in fact, he was arrested. He was Richard Hook has a brilliant article about it. Was George H.W. Bush, did George H.W. Bush supervise the JFK hit team, meaning in the Dow text, to which the answer appears to be emphatically yes. But the key players were Lyndon Johnson of the assassination and J. Edgar. They, of course, were neighbors. Edgar was a godfather to one of Lyndon's daughters, and they both despised the Kennedys. So, you know, there was an unholy alliance.
I'm surprised you didn't include Dulles in that list.
Well, Dulles was much more a figure in the background. I frankly think this David Talbot book about the Devil's Chessboard is a work of disinformation to distract attention from the pivotal role of Lyndon Johnson. I mean, Ralph.
But, one of the things that that struck me, though, is just the fact that Dulles' longtime mistress, a woman named Mary something, I forget her last name, but she was the best friend in the world to Ruth Paine's mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law. In other words, the mother of Michael Paine was best friends.
Well, that's very suggestive of Dulles playing a role in getting Lee into the book depository to be framed as the patsy.
But I was thinking, though, that it also suggests to me that that Dulles was involved in recruiting Ruth Paine to play her part in, you know, coddling Marina and, you know.
That makes a lot of sense.
Ralph, it even appears the book depository was a CIA asset. Okay.
Oh, Jim. Well, this is a good point that I always like to mention the Spider's Web by William Weston, which basically discloses more information about the TSBD. But he makes the case that it was basically a CIA front company, and that the whole book distributing was really mostly a guise. I mean, they did some, but that was really just a cover.
Yeah. Again, the Dow Tex building next door was actually a front for a uranium gathering.
Not the building, Gary. It was the window from which the three shots were fired was a broom closet window for a uranium mining company that was itself a CIA asset.
It appears that the TSBD moved into the building at 401 Elm precisely for the assassination. It only happened that summer before the thing.
Yeah, they were down the street. They were down the street from there.
And it wasn't even. It was too large. They didn't need that much space. The floors were wet because they had a grocer in there, and you know, he had boxes of fresh meat that were leaking. It wasn't even ideal for a book distributor.
I agree, and it didn't appear to be organized in a systematic way if you actually were dealing with books. I never saw a single book in the book depository.
Well, you know, what's interesting is that the whole operation just speaks of complete, total chaos as far as distributing. I mean, they had books stacked, piled up. The tallest stack was about 9 high, and how can anybody even get to such a stack? There were no ladders there. Here's the other thing that stands out to me as a very significant thing, Jim. No one has ever claimed that they retailed books to consumers. They strictly were distributors of school books to schools. That's why they called it the school book depository. Well, a school, unless it's a tiny little thing out in the country with just, you know, 5 students or something, a school has classes, and if they're going to order textbooks, they're going to have a textbook for every student. And if it's, say, they may have 3 or 4 third grade classes, so if they're going to order it, they're going to order several boxes of books. But all of this book distributing that we know of involved just a few units, just whatever a guy could carry in his hands. They didn't provide any carts or wagons for these order fillers. They could, and you know, they wouldn't have had. Nobody ever said they were carrying big boxes of books. In fact, many of the boxes are open, as if somebody had, you know, fumbled through it and was taking out some of the units. But how could it be for schools if there was no large orders?
Yeah. No, those are excellent points, Ralph.
Okay.
And I've interviewed him about the book depository. There actually was a second location in Dallas if the route had been different. So they could have set it up on a different, it's a fascinating story. The guy really knows the inside and out about the building itself and the business as a front for the agency. If we go forward, here's, of course, you know, if you want to talk about conspiracy theories, here's the guy who really did the best work early on, which is, of course, Noel Twyman in Bloody Treason, published in 1997, where he discerned that the most perfect combination with the greatest probability of success was to combine the CIA, military secret service, the mafia with LBJ and Hoover. And since Hoover was, LBJ was a catalyst, he'd forced himself on the ticket in Los Angeles in 1960. When he wasn't on Jack and Bobby's long list, much less their short, Jack had already extended the invitation to Stuart Symington of Missouri to run with him, but gave him overnight to think about it. Bobby went by the Johnson suite to make the pro forma gesture. Astounded that Lyndon jumped on it, he threatened to expose that Jack suffered from Addison's disease and wasn't expected to live a long, healthy life, that he'd had dalliances with beautiful women, some of whom were spies for East Germany, and that if he were not on the ticket, then any legislative proposal sent down by the White House would be dead on arrival because he, in his position as the powerful majority leader of the Senate, would block them. Jack and Bobby tried to figure a way out, but found themselves boxed in and had to accept Lyndon as his running mate. When one of his wealthy backers learned that Lyndon was going to help get JFK elected president, he burst into the Johnson suite cursing and swearing. Bobby Baker took him into a bedroom and explained what they had in mind. He came out all smiles and said, that was an excellent plan. Bobby would later announce that Jack would not live out his term and would die a violent death. And as I previously mentioned, Lyndon sent his chief administrative aide, Cliff Carter, down to Dallas to make sure all the arrangements were in place for the assassination. Phil Nelson has a brilliant book about this LBJ mastermind of JFK's assassination. But there are books by Madeline Duncan Brown, Billy Saul Estes, Barr McClellan. We got E. Howard Hunt's confession. You know, I mean, the amount of evidence, Jack Ruby.
Let me also point out, though, that from the very beginning, Lyndon Johnson made jokes about the idea of him replacing Kennedy. He would say things like, well, you know, 1 out of 4 presidents has died in office, so, you know, I got a 1 in 4 chance here. Just according to the averages. So,
no, that's right, Ralph. When he was interviewed as why he did, he said he'd studied history and he knew that 1 in 4 had died, and he was a gambling man.
He's a gambling man.
Lyndon Johnson was anything but. He only bet on sure things. He knew once he was in the position of vice president, all they had to do was whack Jack and he'd become president, and then he could guarantee that anyone who participated in the assassination would never suffer any punishment for their participation. Here, of course, we have the official account from the 6th floor. We'll look at all the key features, the key buildings, the county records building, the Dow Tex, the book depository, the grassy knoll, the wooden fence, the triple underpass, where we know now that Jack was actually hit at least 4 times. David thinks there may have been a third hit to the head, where he was hit in the back from the county records building, and in the throat by a bullet that passed through the windshield before the driver, William Greer, pulled the limousine to the left into a halt, and where thereafter he was hit in the back of the head by a bullet fired from the Dow Tex. He slumped forward. Jackie eased him up, and he was hit in the right temple by a frangible exploding bullet fired from the intersection of the triple underpass and the picket fence, and he slumped to the left. When they edited the film to merge the 2 shots, they couldn't have 2 shots fired, one from behind and one from in front. They actually cut out too many frames and made a violent back and to the left motion that no one witnessed in Dealey Plaza because it didn't happen. So that the actual shooting sequence...
Let me ask you a question about that. What do you think happened to the back bullet, the one who hit him at T3? What did it do? Officially, it went in a couple of inches, but they never...
It only went in about as far as the second knuckle on your little finger, Ralph. And it may have worked its way out already, even in the limousine. Believe it or not, a neighbor to the driver, whose name was Kinney, told his neighbor in confidence, only to be disclosed after his death, but the neighbor waited until his wife's death as well to notify me that Kinney had told him that he'd found the bullet in the back seat and that he'd taken it into the hospital and lifted it on a stretcher, which is one account, therefore, of the provenance of the magic bullet. It was he, too, by the way, who got the bucket of water and the sponge and began washing the blood and brains out of the back seat at Parkland Hospital.
Oh, that was a crime. But what would cause a shot to to piddle out like that? What would make a bullet just?
Well, it was just hanging there. J. Edgar had the absurd theory that it was during a heart massage that the bullet came out, but it was just ridiculous.
No,
he and LBJ had this scripted conversation, but Edgar couldn't stick to the script, and Lyndon had to get him back on. Michael Best
I don't understand. He had on 3 or 4 layers of clothing. JFK did. So even if the bullet came out, I don't see how it got through the clothing to get.
Yeah. Well, he was wearing the heavy corset, yes, as you're observing, because that's why he couldn't duck. He realized he was hit in the back and called out, "I'm hit." But he couldn't do anything about it. Then he was hit in the throat, and thereafter, of course, he was mute. Jackie was trying to figure out what was going on. But because he had the heavy corset, which he wore every day because of the damage to his back incurred when PT-109, was sunk, he was in pain every day of his life.
Yes,
Ralph.
That's what Robert Kennedy said. Every day.
I'm not vouching for the Kinney story from his neighbor. I'm simply reporting that his neighbor gave me the story, which may be apocryphal. Others, of course, believe that it was Jack Ruby who put this bullet on the stretcher in the hospiel.
But I think wasn't that included in the JFK movie? I think that they did it. Of course,
yeah.
But Robert Shaw, M.D., when shown a photograph of the bullet, said he thought it was most unlikely that it had done all the damage because he'd removed more lead from John Connolly's wrist than was missing from that bullet.
From that bullet, right, and by a long shot too. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break right there. We'll be right back. This is New JFK Show number 168.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
That's what we were told. Most Americans never believed Lee Oswald was the lone gunman, for excellent reasons. In fact, there were at least 6 shooters who fired from 8 to 10 shots or more who are identified here. We have, finally, the solution to the greatest murder mystery in history, laid out for the world to see, proof after proof after proof. Photos were faked, the body was changed, x-rays were altered, the home movies were fixed. 15 experts contribute to a 529-page book with 1,037 photos and diagrams in black and white and color.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you'd like JFK, who, how, and why, and would like to support the new JFK show, then go to patriotradiobooks.com. That's patriotradiobooks.com.
All right, welcome back to the new JFK show number 168. Dr. Fetzer was continuing on with a PowerPoint for everyone. So let's continue on, Dr. Fetzer.
Well, this is to talk about some of the treasure troves, if in fact all the documents are released. We know there are at least 2 that would be, gold mines in terms of the history and understanding of the assassination. One concerns a file of George Joannides, who was the PSY-Ops officer for the agency involved in both the assassination of JFK and of Bobby, too. So the CIA has held on to his files with great tenacity. My personal belief is they would easily destroy the files before they'd allow them to be released. The other is Marita Lorenz, who had been a mistress of Fidel Castro, who traveled to Dallas with some who expected to be participants in the shooting, wanted nothing to do with it, left Dallas. Frank Sturgis, who fired that shot from the intersection of the triple underpass and the grassy knoll that entered the right temple, the frangible or exploding bullet, came to New York City to murder her so she could not testify to the House Select Committee on Assassinations when it reinvestigated the case in 1977-78. However, when he entered her apartment, he was taken into custody by Jim Rothstein, an NYPD Gold Shield detective, and his partner. Rothstein put his gun to Sturgis's head, his partner to his chest, and they took him into custody. Rothstein gave him the throwaway line, nice shooting, and Sturgis admitted that he'd shot Kennedy. He said he did it because he betrayed the Bay of Pigs, the brigade at the Bay of Pigs, and because he had dalliances with beautiful women who were spies for East Germany. That the former was false, but the latter, of course, was true. The fact is he was unable to perform his mission. And Marita Lawrence testified in closed hearings to the committee. She gave them 2 boxes of documents of proof of exactly what happened, which means that the HSCA actually knew the real story of the assassination, but chose to continue to cover it up. Well, Ralph, as I'm sure you're aware, one of the manifest absurdities of their medical panel was to reduce the size of the wound, which had been a fist size at the back of the head in Parkland. 20 witnesses reported seeing it. But where Commander Humes...
all those doctors, demonstrated it like this,
Yeah. Right. There wasn't any doubt about it. We have drawings now from, Dr. McClellan. We have from Dr. Crenshaw. He drew for me both the throat wound before and after the incision and the head wound from the side and from the back. But that Humes, it turns out, and it was Douglas Horne, it was the Assassination Records Review Board that George H.W. Bush the members of which Bush refused to appoint, who during their depositions learned from Thomas Evan Robinson, who was the mortician who prepared the body for funeral, that in fact Humes had taken a cranial saw to the skull of JFK and greatly enlarged the wound, so it was a whole missing back of the head, which is described with mathematical precision in the Bethesda autopsy report. David Lifton was so stunned by this that he called a physician of his acquaintance and asked him, just without identifying the patient, the wound, what did it sound like? And the doctor said it sounded as though he'd been hit in the back of the head with an axe because the blowout was so massive.
Oh, God.
Yeah. They were trying to create the impression that it come in at the base of the back and gone out the top of the head, right at the crown of the head, but it's all completely absurd. What the HSCA did, however, was to shift an actual entry wound, which was in the vicinity of the external occipital protuberance, 4 inches upward to the crown of the head, and claim it was just a neat circular round entry wound, which meant they were not only inconsistent with Parkland, but they were inconsistent with Bethesda. Ironically, Ralph, and this will cause you the distress I felt at this time. I called Cyril Wecht, who had been on the HSCA medical panel, and said, Cyril, how did the House medical panel account for the discrepancy between the huge missing back of the head described in the Bethesda autopsy report and the small wound at the back of the head that was reported to have occurred? And Cyril paused and said to me, I'll have to check my notes.
And that's all he had to say?
That's all he said. Absolutely stunning. So here are 2 treasure troves, which if they come out...
Another heartbreak.
Huh?
I'm sorry, just another heartbreaker, Dr. Fetzer. As they say, 9 out of 10 on the side of the street.
Isn't that sad, Ralph?
Yeah.
Now, here's one of the documents that have come out. This is rather fascinating because I spent from 1971 to 81 pondering the connection between the CIA and Dallas. I knew there had to be one. It was when I realized it was the brothers. That Earl Cabell, then the mayor of Dallas, was the brother of Charles Cabell, deputy director of lieutenant general in the Air Force, whom JFK dismissed along with Richard Bissell after Maxwell Taylor and Bobby Kennedy had, investigated what had happened in the wake of the Bay of Pigs. It turns out one of these documents shows that Earl Cabell joined the CIA in 1957. Actually, look at the date, 1956.
Right. And if we had time, that's my contribution to the show. I wanted to play a video of Earl Cabell after the assassination where he's saying that there's no need to point fingers at a time like this. It's a time for reflection. And here he is in the Central Intelligence Agency since 57 or 56.
You wanted to play that now?
It'll take me a second to find it.
Well, why don't I finish? I've just got 4 or 5 documents. I know we can pause and you can play it. That'll be perfect for the break.
Okay.
So here's a second important. This is a fellow named Orrin Fenton Potito of St. Petersburg, Florida, who apparently knew a great deal about the assassination, gave O'Neill and Wallace, O'Neill with Siebert, of course, were at the autopsy, but in talking about his knowledge, he's had the bottom paragraph. The Surgeon General's report on the assassination stated the first bullet entered the president's throat below the Adam's apple, clearly showing that 2 persons, meaning at least 2 persons, were involved, with the first shot fired from the bridge across the parkway in front of the car. To further substantiate this, Potito said there was a bullet hole in the windshield of the president's car. Well, the fact of the matter is you can see the bullet hole on the left there. That's in the famous Alchin's photograph. Right where JFK's left ear would be if his left ear were visible. The vehicle was sent back to Ford Motor Company on Monday, the day of the formal state funeral, and completely rebuilt. Douglas Weldon, who contributed a brilliant chapter about the Lincoln limousine to murder in Dealey Plaza 2000, even tracked down the Ford official responsible for replacing the windshield, who confirmed it had a through-and-through bullet hole. In fact, at Parkland, as I know you're aware, Ralph, multiple witnesses observed that a police officer even stuck a pencil through the hole. Here on the right is a substitute windshield that came from the Secret Service. It has like a spider-like crack from a fragment being fired at it from behind, but they replace it with a completely clean windshield. So we're talking about 1, and then the clean windshield 2, and then this windshield 3, the substitute presented by the Secret Service. Now, this is a very interesting document from Homer Echeverria, who was a member of a group called, as I recall, November 7th. He was an anti-Castro Cuban. He approached the FBI, I gather, approached the informant to provide machine guns for Cuban revolution on the 21st of November, the day before. The subject allegedly told the informant, "We now have plenty of money. Our new backers are Jews. As soon as we or they take care of Kennedy." Subject expressed favorable attitude toward LBJ. So that's rather interesting in confirming that. In fact, this is suggestive that the involvement of Israel may be more extensive than I have heretofore supposed, although Michael Collins Piper in his book Final Judgment does a very thorough exploration of the motives behind Israel's desire to take out JFK and replace him by LBJ. Gary.
Yeah, let me say this. We have 3 JFK shows dedicated to that. They're called Permindex, Permindex 2, and we also have the Michael Collins Piper show. So, and there's one that says JFK Israeli involvement. So we've covered this at length. And let's not forget that Jack Ruby said that he was in the police station translating for Israeli reporters. So what's Jack Ruby knowing how to talk Israeli anyway? The Israeli language.
Was it Hebrew? Well, Jack was, of course, Jewish. I mean, his name was Rubenstein. But I would say this would be Hebrew, Gary. There's no Israeli language.
It's not uncommon for Jewish families to have their children take Hebrew classes, and I mean, even if they don't speak it at home, just this kind of so that they'll have some ability to speak Hebrew. It's a pretty common thing. I mean, even today it is. So.
Well, that was Jack Ruby's excuse for being in the police station.
Right. Okay.
Well, here's a very interesting document. On September 16, 1965, the same source reported the KGB residency in New York City received instructions approximately September 16th from KGB headquarters to develop all possible information concerning President Lyndon B. Johnson's character, background, personal friends, family, and from which quarters he derives his support in his position as president. One source added that in the instructions from Moscow, it indicated that now the KGB was in possession of data purporting to indicate President Johnson was responsible for the assassination of the late President John F. Kennedy. And this, of course, was quite correct. I mean, they had an excellent, diagnosis of the situation. So this is a rather striking, each of these in their own way provide striking confirmation for the account of the assassination that we have developed. Here, indeed, is yet another. They confirmed that CIA had over 40 journalists who were undercover CIA agents. How many do we have today? Well, it's virtually all of them. I mean, William Colby, then its director, testified to Congress in 1975 that the agency owned everyone of significance in the media. Then there wasn't a distinction between the mainstream and the alternative, Ralph. But today the matter is much worse. I even refer to the New York Times as the Langley newsletter because the agency so completely dominates everything it publishes.
Right.
And this is interesting too. A report, this is even from the New York Times, JFK files release highlighting Hoover, LBJ, among others, because as I have already observed, they were the facilitators, they were the keys who made it happen and covered it up. Lyndon for the assassination, Hoover for the cover-up. And of course, Jackie there is wearing a huge bouquet of red roses. Everywhere else she got yellow roses. But in Dallas, they wanted her to have red roses to indicate the location of JFK. Nellie had a huge bouquet of yellow. And it also meant, of course, red, stop, don't shoot this woman. They were very protective of Jackie, and there was strict instruction she must not be harmed. Here, of course, now is my fourth book on JFK, the first three, Assassination Science, 1998, Murder in Dealey Plaza, 2000, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, 2003, which even Vincent Bugliosi described as the only exclusively scientific books ever published on the assassination. So now we have, this is 529 pages, 1,037 photos and illustrations, including 486 of the frames of the Zapruder film available at moonrockbooks.com. And now, Gary, I would suggest we break for you to show the video. I'll put on pause for recording.
All right, we're going to go ahead and play Earl Cabell, who the new, probably one of the biggest revelations of the new document files that have been released. So here we go. Dr. Fetzer, would you like to introduce Earl Cabell a little bit?
Well, Earl was the brother of Charles, who was born in Dallas in 1903. Charles would become the deputy director of the CIA, a three-star lieutenant general in the Air Force, and an icon of the agency. He and Richard Bissell were both dismissed by JFK in the wake of the investigation of the Bay of Pigs fiasco, which turned out to be a bait and switch. Everyone knew it wasn't going to be a success. In fact, the CIA had learned that the Soviets knew the date of the invasion and had already informed Fidel Castro. So the Soviets, Fidel, and the agency knew, Castro knew the date we were coming. The only one left out of the loop was JFK, because they were playing him and expected him to send in the Marines. Otherwise, he'd have to take egg on his face, which, of course, dumbfounded them when that's what he chose to do. So Earl was born near Dallas in 1906, which means that the axis connecting the CIA with Dallas was the Cabell brothers, who represented both the motivation from the CIA and the opportunity in Dallas, where the mayor was supervisor of ceremonial activities, including motorcades and the like, and of course of the police department as well. Earl Cabell.
After having gone through the events of today, frankly, I'm still in a state of shock, and it's hard to collect my thoughts and to be coherent. When you think that when Mrs. Cabell and I welcomed the President, Mrs. Kennedy, the Vice President, and Mrs. Johnson on their arrival this morning, the completely friendly atmosphere that pervaded the whole ceremony And then that magnificent caravan through the streets of Dallas, and where we remarked that never in our lives, in the lifetime that we've spent here in Dallas, have we seen so many thousands of people turn out for any event. Never have we seen such enthusiasm, such warmth. Never have we seen such spontaneous applause that greeted car after car as they passed. And then after 12 or 13 miles of that type of reception, and to hear those shots ring out and to realize what they meant, what was going on, it's indescribable. What will that do to Dallas, Mayor? I don't think that this will hurt Dallas as a city, because I believe that the people of the nation realize that this was not an act of Dallas, not an act of the true thinking of Dallas. This was the act of a maniac. And this maniac could just as well have lived in Miami, could have lived in New York, St. Louis, or anywhere else. This was one of those unusual maniacal acts that necessarily did not belong to any one city. I cannot point my finger at any individual or even group of individuals in Dallas that would knowingly have incited or perpetrated any such act as this.
It's a maniacal event, is what he said. So,
well, Gary, that was quite a performance by the mayor, who, of course, was, doing what he could to promote the idea of a lone demented gunman. And, he knew full well this didn't come as a surprise to him, because he and his brother had been in collusion together plotting this out. He was playing his role.
Jim,
and here he had an opportunity to,
these images here on the right, because they're covering up part of the picture, and there's something in the very upper right of the picture that is the focus of what I mean to explain.
You have to use your
cursor. We'll get there, Ralph. You gotta follow up that is just focused there. A point I would make is, look, right above JFK's head is a notorious assassin, Lucien Conein.
Right.
I mean, it's simply stunning. There you see the second photograph at the top. I mean, that's Conein there, who's right above JFK, and it's amazing to me how
they went to a very concerted effort to lie about that. What they did was they drummed up this postal worker, I forget his name. They claimed that's who it was. And they brought out a picture that looks kind of like this guy, although not at all identical. But what I discovered is that they manipulated the image of the postal worker. He actually had a much rounder, fatter face, and they just worked the aspect ratio to create a more kind of horse-shaped face. And so the whole thing was a lie. That is definitely Lucien Conein. This whole image is what I call Spook Alley, because the guy next to him, I believe, is E. Howard Hunt.
Oh, with the hat there.
With a hat and the trench coat, and
whose face is blocked by the motorcycle patrolman's helmet.
And it's impossible for anything to have made his entire head, including his ears, totally black in shadow.
Nice point, Ralph. I love it.
But anyway, behind the images of the three of us, one of our members, whose name is Paul Stevens, who is a teacher who lives in England, found what he believes is a photographic alteration, and I agree with him after he pointed it out. It's his work, not mine.
Okay, here's Lucien Conein, whom we agree is the man immediately above JFK's face.
This is what I'm talking about here. There's this picture of this older woman and this boy, and it's a very archaic looking image. It looks like some very, very, very old photograph. And it is inconsistent with the rest of the photo. It's much grayer. It's much more drab. And
it was photoshopped in.
And definitely, I think, was put in. That's what Paul thinks, and that's what I think. And I want to make a few points to sort of vouch for that, to substantiate it. First of all, I want to point out that neither of them are looking properly at the event. The boy is looking way off, away from the Kennedys, and even the woman has got a blank stare. She's not looking at the Kennedys. She's looking straight ahead. So they seem to be divorced from the event that's going on. His dress seems extremely old-fashioned. That's why I have the feeling this is like they must have used
around
turn of the century photo to come up with this, because about his clothes suggests very earlier time. But the other thing is this, is how is she holding him? Because you see her left hand in front of her, and that hand isn't actually supporting him. So that means she's using just one hand, her right hand, to basically support him. And the fact is that little kids, they're heavy, and as you keep holding them, they get heavier. And what I mean by that is that your muscles start fatiguing, and after a while, and especially if you're a woman, you're not that strong to begin with. You're watching a parade. You can't just keep holding a kid like that. And she's supposedly is doing it with one hand. But there's another thing. If she were holding him with just one hand, the boy would intuitively and instinctively realize that he's kind of on a very perilous perch here, and he would go to her to get support. He'd lean toward her. And he'd put his arm around her, and he would do it automatically, and he's not doing it. So this is something that I think was put in there because there was probably another spook right here.
Right, I agree.
Wanted to cover up.
Excellent, excellent.
Besides Hunt and besides Conan, that you had Jim Featherstone, who was he's the reporter who basically finagled Mary Moorman into turning her photo over. And also, I want to point out that first photo was actually still a crop, and that there's other people to our left who others have identified as CIA operatives. So that's the reason why I refer to this Alston's photo as Spook Alley.
Well, and of course, there's a whole group of them at the corner of Main and Houston. I mean, there are like 6 prominent CIA officials there paying their last respects.
Well, this is right on Houston, and it's a little past Maine. So
there's a rather famous website called Familiar Faces in Dealey Plaza that James Richards and this other fellow have maintained for a long time. Well, you'll find one after another representative of the agency there in Dealey Plaza, Ralph. So you're right on it.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I'm going to try to move now. Let's go to the next one. All right, now this is a little bit for comic relief, but I don't know if you recognize this guy, but this is Danny Aiello, the actor. And he made a movie in 1992 called Ruby, about Jack Ruby. And this was his signature look in the movie. Eyeglasses, fedora hat. And go to the next one. Even when he was reenacting the shooting of Oswald, as he was going down to the garage, you can see that he's wearing the sunglasses right here, the dark glasses. Now, as soon as I saw that, I began to wonder, well, why did they designate, sunglasses on Jack Ruby? It's not as though we have a lot of images of Jack Ruby in sunglasses. And on the day of the Oswald shooting, they took an inventory of all Jack Ruby's possessions that he had on him and in his car. And the only glasses he had were a pair of bifocals.
Yeah.
Not sunglasses. So he didn't
wear sunglasses, but it was convenient to conceal the identity, since it was, in fact, not Jack.
Right. Okay, so go to the next frame. So the reason why, though, I believe the reason why Danny Aiello decided to adopt that look is because of this image. That's supposed to be Jack Ruby seconds before the shooting, and obviously it looks like he's wearing sunglasses. Now, what's happened is that since it's become publicized and broadcast that Jack Ruby definitely did not have sunglasses on him or on that day, that the story has become that black disc around his eye is a shadow. And it's ridiculous because he's standing in the light. His light is streaming into his face. He's very illuminated. And there's no object that could cast a concentric black shadow that would completely form a black disc around his eye. So there's no way it could be a shadow. There's no way it could be sunglasses. And I want you to realize that is an extremely manipulated image. Do me a favor. I want you to look at the space, that is the gap between his sideburn and his ear. Do you see how
Too great, too great. That's because they whited out the side of the glasses, Jack.
I'm going to turn sideways just so that people can get an idea that the side
Right.
is right next to the ear. There's really no more than a centimeter between the sideburn and the ear.
Right.
So that is a highly manipulated photo. And
it's when they took out the side of the glasses, you know, the frame.
Right. And but I think that they did a lot more than that too. Again, I think it's an extremely manipulated image. It definitely isn't Jack Ruby.
Right.
And, but this is what's, you know, come back to haunt them and even affected the movie made in 1992. All right, go to the next image, please. All right, now this is the GIF. And I want you to just notice this guy nodding. It's going to play again. This is Detective McMillan. He's behind the trio of Lavelle, Oswald, and Graves. Can you play it again?
Yeah,
okay.
It'll play.
And he's going to nod. Watch this now. He nods. He makes a quick nod to somebody as if something's going to happen here. That was a communication. Now, I want to remind everybody that this was supposed to be, ostensibly, a 30-foot walk to a car. Oswald was to get in the car and be driven away, and that's it. Why would he have to be nodding here as if something, you know, very, you know,
very
special.
Good. Very
Something
good.
Very special.
Very good, Ralph. You're excellent on these details.
Well, the reason I brought this is because at the exact same time, there's somebody else who nodded, and that is Will Fritz. And I brought the nod, but I don't have it as a GIF. So I brought two frames. Go to the next. Oh, wait a second. You put them together. Okay, that was smart. Who did that?
I did that.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay. All right. I wanted you to see that on the left, he's looking back, and he hasn't started nodding yet. And on the right, and I kind of timed this myself by just stopping the film, is when his head went down and he delivered a nod. Now, there was some information in that nod. A nod is a form of talking non-verbally. And I think what he probably was communicating was that he caught sight of Ruby. I mean, well, of the guy who was supposed to be Ruby, that the shooter was in place. He was sending the message back, yes, everything is a go, we're all set up, and this was what the nod was for. If it was just going to be a 30-foot walk to a car, get in and drive away, what's to nod about? It's ridiculous. We got two guys nodding in the midst of a 30-foot walk. So to me, this is very, very telling. Okay, let's go to the next image, please. All right, now this is very big. This is a discovery that I and Amy and the Wizard made in just the last week. And I think it's absolutely huge, and it concerns Detective L.C. Graves. From the beginning, and even at the trial of Ruby when he was under oath, he said that he rode in the ambulance to the hospital with Oswald, and that was a lie, and we can prove it now. He did not ride. He rode in a separate vehicle. He lied when he said it. What I have here is a diagram of the ambulance. This is the ambulance, and I've designated where everybody sat. In the front seat, of course, you had the driver, Michael Harden, and you had this Harold Wolf, his assistant, so that took up the front seat. In the middle seat, there was two fold-down seats. On the left side, the seat was folded down because it took the entire length of the back of the car from the tailgate to the front seat to accommodate the stretcher. So that was all Oswald on the left side. On the right side of the middle seat sat the medical student, Fred Bieberdorf, whom I refer to as the Beeb. And then in the very back with Oswald were the two detectives, Doherty and Lavelle. Now, if you watch the films, and more than one of them, it shows you that as they were loading the stretcher onto the left side of the ambulance, that you can see Charles Doherty and Jim Lavelle crawl into the right side of the back, right over the lowered tailgate. And as soon as Lavelle gets in, the tailgate is lifted, it's closed, and it's done. Nobody else gets in. And Graves is still outside the car. So as you look at this picture, we know that Graves didn't get in the back. He certainly didn't sit in the front. If you were going to try to say that he rode in this vehicle, the only thing you could claim is that he opened the middle door and sat in Bieberdorf's lap. That would have been the only way that he could have ridden in this vehicle. But here's what happens. Go to the next image. All right, this is Graves. Now, the ambulance is already gone. It's out of view. And I want to point out that it turned left on Commerce, and Commerce went that direction. But it was very close to the intersection of Harwood, Harwood. That was the street that the City Hall building was on. In fact, City Hall had a Harwood address. It did not have a Commerce address. The address was 106 Harwood. So it was only a very small, short jog to just get to the intersection and turn right on Harwood. And if they had done that, they would have had a much faster, more efficient route to Parkland Hospital. Because if you look at the map, Harwood went that direction. It went north, and it went straight up to the road that took you to Parkland. It was really like a straight line to Parkland if they just turned right and went up Harwood, which they could have done because traffic was stopped, cops were everywhere, it was an ambulance, so obviously it has the legal right to go, the wrong way, and there was no risk of a collision. So it's an outrage that in a life or death situation that they would have gone left, which was diabolically opposite to what they really needed to do. And they ended up going all the way down to this freeway, getting on the freeway, at least according to what they claimed. They go 2 blocks to Maine. So they go from Commerce to Maine, and then they get off the freeway and come all the way back down Maine to Harwood, which means that they essentially made a circle, which wasted all that time, and then finally turned on Harwood and
Don't you imagine they were hoping he would bleed to death in the meanwhile?
Yes, I do think that that's part of it. But anyway, this isn't too clear, but the man who's driving this car is not wearing a police uniform. He's in a suit, and he's wearing a fedora hat. And that's exactly how L.C. Graves was dressed. And he pulls out very fast here. You get the impression that he's trying to catch up with the ambulance that already left. And those are the only 2 vehicles that left. The ambulance followed by this car, and this is where L.C. Graves was. This is how he got there. But Gary, go to the next image.
I just love what you're doing with this, Ralph. I think it's fantastic.
As you look at this image here, I want you to start by looking in the background, in the distance. Do you see the vehicle that's got 3 headlights in the distance? In other words, you can see 3 white lights.
Which may be a shine, but it might be a Studebaker.
No. That's what I'm pointing out is that's the ambulance. It had 3 headlights.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It had a center headlight as well as 2 one on each side. That's the ambulance. We're seeing the front of the ambulance right there. Yeah. So anyway, and you notice that the man driving this police car is that you can see his hat, can't you? That's a fedora.
Yes.
Graves was one of those exceptions. He was one of Fritz's men, but he didn't wear the white Stetson hat. He wore this typical fedora hat instead. So that's Graves driving the police car, but he was behind the ambulance when they left the police station.
Right, now he's in front of it.
He's in front of it. Now, what happened? I don't for one second think that he sped so fast as to overtake the ambulance. Who would try to chase a speeding ambulance and get ahead of it? That would be dangerous. And there was no need to because, a police escort is used when there's going to be speeding involved and the vehicle that's, being led to the hospital is not an ambulance and needs to have, a way to kind of speed and break traffic laws without getting pulled over by someone else. So the guy at the cop in front puts his, his siren on and he can lead someone to the hospital. Well, the ambulance had its own siren. It had 2 police officers in the car, and it had the legal right to drive as fast as it wanted. So there was no benefit to having a police escort, and it's just ludicrous to think that Graves would have had any reason to try to overtake the ambulance and get in front of it. So what this tells me is that they must have stopped somewhere, and when they finished doing whatever they did when they stopped and they resumed their travel, that Graves led the way.
Well, it could have been to perform PCR on a patient with internal wounds to promote bleeding.
Well, here's the thing, though. I mean, for a very long time, I assumed that they probably shot Oswald in the police station. But now, especially in the wake of this discovery that Graves lied about driving in the ambulance, and then the fact that the order of the vehicles got reversed, which indicates to me that they must have stopped somewhere. That's the only way he could have gotten even with them and then got ahead of them. And it makes me think that they basically finished Oswald en route. They went somewhere, and that's where Oswald got his walking papers. So this may be the lowdown of it, but the very fact that Graves would lie and say that he rode in the ambulance, why would he do that? I mean, what would be so terrible?
Ralph, are you there?
Looks like we lost him.
Gary, I'm gonna pause the recording. Go. Go ahead, Ralph.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Can I continue?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Bieberdorf lied to the Warren Commission. He told them that Detective Lavelle sat next to him in the middle seat. That was impossible. There was nobody sitting next to him. The only one sitting next to him in the middle seat was Oswald, because the middle seat was folded down. All right, let's go on to this image. And I have a question for you about this. I brought this as a curiosity. This is from a newspaper, and it shows Ruby at his trial. He's either walking in or walking out. But they enhanced his hair here. They gave him much more hair than he actually had.
Yes, because I didn't recognize him as Ruby because of that hair.
I'm sure it is. It's supposed to be Ruby, but I can't even figure out why they. And I only brought this one, but there were several others I found
to make him look more like Bookout.
Well, I'm thinking that maybe they thought that it would make him look, I don't know, maybe better nourished, like he was getting good care or something from the police. Make him look healthier or something. Go to the next image. You'll see how bald he was. Go to the next image. Yeah, this was him on the 25th. This was the day after the Oswald shooting. And you can see how sparse his hair was on top. And it wasn't nearly as thick and well covered.
He doesn't look very good here.
No, he doesn't look very good here at all. But so anyway, I'm thinking that maybe they were just trying to make him look a little healthier, younger, whatever, just to look less pathetic, perhaps. I don't know. But it's a very odd thing that they would do such a petty manipulation as that. All right, go to the next image. All right, this is another discovery that just came to light in the last week or 10 days, and I think it's very big. It's a letter that was written by Jack Ruby to his brother Earl. It was only about 2 weeks before he died, so this was very close to the end of his life. I'm going to just read it aloud. Earl, I want you to know that I never knew Oswald. I was not in any conspiracy. I did not plan to shoot him, and after it happened, I didn't know what I had done. And that's because he hadn't done it. I mean, he didn't know it because they just told him, and he believed it. Oh, Earl, I wish that this had never happened. Never realized this would cause so much grief to so many. How I wish the last 3 years of my life, etc. It breaks off after that. Yeah. But to me, that is really highly significant. Even at that point, and remember, the significant thing here is that this is a letter to his brother, just to his brother, and not anything that he ever expected to have publicized, probably. And there's no reason to think he would be lying at this point. And he's admitting here that he had no plan to shoot Oswald, and he didn't even know he did it after he supposedly did. Poor guy. All right, go to the next image, please. All right. Now, I should have announced at the beginning that this collection is a bit of a hodgepodge, but I wanted to bring this, and it concerns the Three Tramps photo. The image on the right is from the Three Tramps photo. Of course, I have it cropped. We're seeing this figure in the doorway there, shortly after the shooting, and he's talking to a police officer. I'm pretty sure that that officer was the Inspector Sawyer. J.H. Sawyer was his name. And while they're talking at the top of the landing of the doorway of the book depository, the three tramps are being led through the plaza. I'm inclined to think that this man on the right is Oswald, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, if you look at the shape of his head and you compare it to Oswald here on the left from the Trade Mart in New Orleans, you see an eerie similarity in the shape of the head and in the laying of the hair and the sparseness of the hair in front. It all matches pretty darn well. But I also want you to note that Oswald did have a tendency to hold his shoulders back. A lot of people slump or they sloop, but he held his shoulders back, and you were seeing him do that on the right here. We're seeing the same long neck. Oswald had a long neck. And I want you to look very closely. On the left here, you can see this ID bracelet that he had on his wrist. And if you look on the right, it does look like there's something shiny there that's reflecting the light that, to me, looks like it could indeed be the same.
Ralph, you're really good at this stuff. I gotta tell you, really remarkable. I love it.
Here's the thing. You know, when I've posed this to people that looks like Oswald to me, people immediately reply, well, it can't be, because it wasn't until about 2 o'clock that the tramps were led through the plaza. And obviously Oswald was already in custody by then, so the time doesn't work. It can't be him. But I want the viewers to know that Jim Marrs did a program once about this, and he claimed in that program, I watched it, it's on YouTube, that they actually lied about the time that the three tramps were there, that actually it was much earlier, and that they wanted it to seem like it was later. And the reason why is because if they had rounded up if they were back there in the train area, the railway area, and looking as early as 12:30, that it might look like they had the expectation of knowing more than they should have known at that point, and so that they pushed it back. And he claims, what Jim claimed on the show is that there's actually multiple sets of these three tramp photos, and that some of them were actually faked because they wanted to again put the time back to around 2 o'clock. But one of the things that I often say to people, and it's true for me, and as far as I'm concerned, it's true for everybody, and that is that the images rule. That when we see something in an image, and we can verify it, the image trumps any lip flapping that anybody else can do. So what I tell people is this, is that until somebody can identify this person as somebody else other than Oswald, that to me, Oswald remains the one and only candidate for who he could be. To me, it is just eerie to think that there was somebody else at the book depository who looked that much and dressed that much like Oswald. So as far as I'm concerned, like it or not, that's Oswald. All right, go to the next image.
Yeah, the shirt looks the same. It's the same shirt.
Shirt too, yes, absolutely. Too much coincidence there. Can't buy it otherwise. All right, now this was my contribution to the document dump. This is something that I found, and it's an example of what I expected to find. What I mean is that I knew very well they poured through it and redacted anything major that they could see, but a lot of little things, they weren't smart enough to realize that it really did convey more than they wanted to, and I'll tell you what I mean. All right, so it says, from the document dump, this is a memo by J. Edgar Hoover, written right on the 24th, shortly after Oswald died. He says, there's nothing on the Oswald case. There's nothing further on the Oswald case except that he is dead. And I had to laugh when I read that, because it sounds very much like saying, well, thank God there's nothing further. He's dead, because, wow, we dodged a bullet on that one, didn't we? That's, in so many words, that's what he was saying. But then he goes on to say something else that, to me, is very, very, very significant. He says the following: the thing I'm concerned about and so is Mr. Katzenbach, is having something issued so we can convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin, the real assassin. Now, first of all, this is a kind of a, you might say, like a Freudian slip, because the very fact that he would allude to the idea that people would think he was not the real assassin. It would have been one thing if he had said that Oswald was the lone assassin or the only assassin. But here he's saying the real assassin, as if even he knows that people are going to doubt that he was, precisely because he wasn't. But that's not even the part that I think is so significant. The part that's so significant is him mentioning Katzenbach. Katzenbach was the assistant attorney general. Now, you know, Jim, as I do, that Katzenbach is famous for a memo that he wrote the following day, the 25th, which he sent to Bill Moyers, who at the time was very, very high up in the so-called Texas Mafia of LBJ, in which he said to Moyers that, well, the important thing now is that people realize that Oswald did it without Confederates. That's the word he used, Confederate. He didn't say accomplices. He said Confederates. And that's an awfully loaded term. As you, Gary, living in Louisiana, probably know, Confederates. But then he goes on to say, and we want them to realize that he would have been convicted if he had gone to trial. Okay, so that's a very famous memo.
Which is very interesting because we're having a mock trial now in Houston.
Yes, indeed.
In proximity to the new conference 17, 18, 19. And also because the Katzenbach Memorandum is in fact included in Assassination Science, the first of my 3 books.
Well, I'm glad it was, and I'm glad you mentioned it. But here's what I'm getting at is this, Jim. Katzenbach issued his famous memo on the 25th, and yet Hoover on the 24th is revealing right here that he's already talked to Katzenbach and he's had the same discussion, and basically Katzenbach apparently said the same thing to him that he was going to say to Moyers the next day. But my question is, why was the head of the FBI talking to the assistant attorney general? Why wasn't he talking to the attorney general? I mean, at that point in time...
Because the attorney general was Bobby Kennedy.
Well, right. The attorney general was Bobby Kennedy. But
they were boxing Bobby out from the moment of the assassination. Right. Bobby was isolated with Lyndon above and Hoover below.
You said it, Jim. Now, the way I was going to put it was this, and this is what I think this reveals. That the minute that JFK's his brain was blown out, Robert Kennedy lost his job for all practical purposes.
Of course.
He kept the name and, maybe he sat in at cabinet meetings, but basically he was eviscerated, and Katzenbach became the de facto attorney general from that point on. So here's what I think. This is what I think. I'm surmising this. I'm deducing this, but I think it's valid. I think that Hoover must have gone to Katzenbach before this happened, before the 24th, maybe the 23rd, and said, look, we've got big plans for you. You're going to be the next attorney general, but we need your support. This is a time of crisis. It's a national emergency. Everybody has to rally together. We want to know that you're going to support, the facts as we lay them out here, because that's what patriotism demands at a time.
We think it would be very troubling for the nation and very bad if the conspiracy theories, the idea that there were multiple gunmen should flourish within the community.
And they may even put it in the most extreme terms, that there could be chaos, there could be civil disobedience, there might even be a civil war. We can't let that happen. We all have to unite around this story. But here's what really gets me is this. Katzenbach worked for Robert Kennedy, right? He was his second in command. And this just happened, and I don't presume that Katzenbach was in on the assassination. I'm not going to make that assumption. But it seems to me that before committing to the story that he was being asked to support, that he would talk to his boss, that he would go to Robert Kennedy and say, look, I've been contacted by Moyers, I've been contacted by Hoover. This is what they're telling me about what happened.
No.
They're asking me to support it, but I want to know what you think.
They would have told Katzenbach in this time of grief, we don't want to burden the Attorney General with decisions that he may be ill prepared to make under the stressful circumstances.
Yeah,
they would have just cut him out.
I agree completely that that's what they said, but I would add, though, that they said it out of convenience. And even in that situation, it seems to me that if Katzenbach was loyal to RFK and also to JFK, who was his ultimate boss, he would have said, well, in that case, I'm going to have to wait until I have a chance to talk to him because, you know, we're a team. He's the Attorney General. I'm his assistant. And I'm not going to speak for him. And I'm not going to speak for this department because he's still the Attorney General. So as far as I'm concerned, it was an act of betrayal by Katzenbach and also an act of opportunism on his part to become, you know, launched.
Ralph, I just want to take this occasion to tell you that I think you have a genius for JFK research, and I just was fascinated by everything you said tonight. And you've been proven right time and time again, even on what heretofore was thought to be highly improbable conjectures, including that it was not actually Ruby who shot Lee Oswald. I just want to compliment you, Ralph, for all of your excellent work in contributing to the assassination, including your 2 appearances on InfoWars, which I surmise will be the only 2 we ever have the opportunity to present. You did them very well.
Gary, go to the next image, please. Thank you. Thank you.
That was it? That was the last image?
No, what are you talking about? I sent you a whole PowerPoint.
No, there was 17 images. Those were all of them.
Oh, were they all of them? Let me just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead. You're right. My mistake. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Another thing that I found. This is another little kind of you might say
a detour.
Well, I was going to say it's a little gem that I found already in the documents just from browsing myself. And what I found was numerous telegrams from this man, Robert P. Gemberling, who was at the time an FBI agent in Dallas, directly to J. Edgar Hoover. Now, it strikes me as a little bit odd that in an agency as big as the federal, the FBI, which had thousands and thousands of agents and thousands of other personnel, that an agent would just be sending a telegram directly to J. Edgar Hoover. But Gemberling obviously had a fast track to Hoover because he sent him numerous telegrams. Now, I did read several of them, and most of them had to do with images that were found of one thing or another. Some of them had to do with the evidence from Mexico City that supposedly of maybe some witness who said he saw Oswald in Mexico City, things like that. But as I kept dwelling on this, I began to think, where did I see that name Gemberling before? Well, Gemberling was one of the 2 FBI agents who interviewed Billy Lovelady on February 29th, 1964, and took the famous photographs of him posing in the short-sleeved striped shirt with the shirt unbuttoned.
Really?
Duplicating the look of...
On the 29th of February, 1964.
Yeah, the look of Gemberling. And also putting in writing that Lovelady said that those were the clothes.
This was the shirt he wore the day of the shooting. And
actually, they put it in writing twice.
Yes.
2 different letters. And it was because of that and the stink that Harold Weisberg made about it that they started going into the movie business, as I put it, and coming up with these bogus images of Lovelady wearing a plaid shirt. It was all because of the botch up by this guy Gemberling that became necessary.
And there, the crucial role was being played by Robert Groden, unbelievably.
Well, indeed. Well, we should do a whole show on him sometime. But anyway, what this guy did after he retired from the FBI, he became a public speaker, and he really tried to create I don't know how successful he was, but he tried to create a career for himself as a speaker on the JFK assassination. And he's writing here to a university in your state, Tim, the University of Wisconsin.
I'm noticing.
Steve Point, Wisconsin, and he's talking about the assassination. And what he says about himself is that the material he presents will be of considerable interest to all persons, regardless of their business, profession, personal, or political views, theories, or opinions. I mean, did he really think that what he was going to present was going to impress someone like you if you were attending with any opinion at all? So he really thought a lot of his own persuasive abilities. But he went around the country, and I guess I didn't bring it, but he even gave a rate. At the time, he was charging $1,500 per speech, plus airfare and plus rental car.
That's a pretty good chunk of change for that time.
For that time, we're talking, the 1970s. This is before all the inflation hit. So yeah, he thought very highly of himself. But to me, the irony is that this is the guy that botched the whole Lovelady presentation.
And here it talks about the lecture on the left, and the cost of the lecture, $1,500 plus round trip, first class airfare. First class airfare.
But anyway, this guy, again, I always knew that the guy who did this was an idiot, that he looked at this man standing in a short sleeve shirt and didn't realize that he couldn't possibly be the doorway man.
That was fun to go back as an addendum, Ralph. I'm glad you reminded me.
All right,
two more slides. That was wonderful.
It's been a great pleasure to me tonight talking with you guys, and I just...
I thought you were sensational. Sensational. I really liked it.
And listen, Jim, let me make a final remark that I want everybody to come back next week, because we have a wonderful new researcher, Amy Joyce, who's going to present her materials on Oswald and Ruby. And she has got such a keen mind, and she has already made a very significant contribution to the work. And just a few days ago, I'm happy to say, she has told me to add her name to the roster of the Oswald Innocence Campaign. So she is one of us now. And so she's going to be on the show next week, and I think everybody is going to be very impressed with her.
All right. Well, it's just another day in JFK here at the new JFK show, number 168. All right, we're going to see you next week, and we look forward.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Great job, Ralph.
Thank you.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
That's what we were told. Most Americans never believed Lee Oswald was the lone gunman, for excellent reasons. In fact, there were at least 6 shooters who fired from 8 to 10 shots or more who are identified here. We have, finally, the solution to the greatest murder mystery in history, laid out for the world to see, proof after proof after proof. Photos were faked, the body was changed, x-rays were altered, the home movies were fixed. 15 experts contribute to a 529-page book with 1,037 photos and diagrams in black and white and color.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you'd like JFK, who, how, and why, and would like to support the new JFK show, then go to PatriotRadioBooks.com. That's PatriotRadioBooks.com.